please, my baby is freezing. Just a little food.
I told you to leave. Get out of this restaurant.
I never imagined that a single evening would strip away every illusion I had about human decency. My name is Clara, and I'm a mother trying to survive in a world that has forgotten what mercy looks like. This is the story of the night I learned that power can wear many faces, and sometimes, justice comes from the most unexpected places. The rain had been relentless that evening, turning the city streets into rivers of cold, unforgiving water. I clutched my 6-month-old daughter Emma closer to my chest, feeling her tiny body shiver against mine despite the thin blanket I'd wrapped around her. My coat, threadbare and soaked through, offered little protection against the autumn chill. Emma's cries had grown weaker over the past hour, and that terrified me more than her screaming ever could. A hungry baby cries. A silent baby worries every mother's heart. I'd been walking for 3 hours, moving from shelter to shelter, doorway to doorway, searching for somewhere warm where Emma could rest. The homeless shelter was full. The community center had closed early. Every church I'd tried was locked for the night. My fingers were numb, my feet ached, and my pride had long since dissolved into the puddles beneath my feet. That's when I saw it. Giovanni's. An upscale Italian restaurant with warm golden light spilling from its windows onto the wet pavement. Through the glass I could see well-dressed people laughing, eating, living lives that seemed impossibly distant from my own. The aroma of fresh bread and roasted garlic drifted through the door each time it opened, making my empty stomach clench with longing. I wasn't there to eat. I couldn't afford a glass of water in a place like that. I just needed warmth. Somewhere Emma could stop shivering for a few minutes. Somewhere I could change her diaper and maybe feed her the last bottle of formula I'd been saving. Just 20 minutes. That's all I needed. I pushed through the heavy door and immediately felt the blast of heated air against my frozen skin. The restaurant was crowded, filled with the sounds of conversation, clinking glasses and soft classical music. For a moment I just stood there in the entrance, letting the warmth seep into my bones, watching Emma's little face relax slightly as the cold released its grip on her. That moment of relief lasted exactly 5 seconds. A woman appeared before me so quickly I actually stepped back. She was tall, immaculately dressed in a black designer suit, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disdain. Her name tag read Victoria, head hostess. Her eyes traveled from my wet hair down to my worn shoes, and her lip curled in barely concealed disgust. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a private establishment. You cannot be here." I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "I'm sorry, I just need a moment to warm up. My baby, she's been in the cold too long and I thought maybe." "You thought wrong." Victoria crossed her arms, positioning her body to block my view of the dining room. "This restaurant has a strict dress code and reservation policy. You clearly meet neither requirement." "Please," I heard myself say, hating the desperate tone in my voice but unable to stop it. "I'm not asking for food. I just need to sit down for a few minutes. My daughter is cold and I need to feed her. 20 minutes. That's all." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Do you see that dining room?" She gestured behind her without breaking eye contact with me. "Those are paying customers. People who respect this establishment. People who belong here. What you're doing is loitering and I will call the police if you don't leave immediately." Emma began to cry, her small voice breaking through the restaurant's pleasant ambience. Several heads turned toward us. I bounced her gently, trying to soothe her, but she was beyond comfort now. She was hungry, cold, and exhausted. "Please," I said again, my voice cracking. "She's just a baby. I'm not asking for charity. I'll stand in the corner. I'll stay out of everyone's way. I just need somewhere warm for her. What I'm about to tell you might be hard to believe, but what I need you to understand is this. Sometimes there are people in this world who see kindness as weakness, who mistake desperation for something they can step on. Victoria was one of those people. Her hand moved so fast I barely registered it. The slap connected with my cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. My head snapped to the side and I instinctively tightened my grip on Emma, making sure she was secure even as stars exploded across my vision. "Get out." Victoria's voice was low and venomous. "You come into this establishment smelling like the street with your bastard child expecting what? Sympathy? Charity? This is a business, not a homeless shelter. Leave before I have you arrested for trespassing and child endangerment. The entire restaurant had gone silent. 50 people, maybe more, all staring at us. And not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. They looked at me, at Emma crying in my arms, at the red mark blooming on my cheek, and they did nothing. They turned back to their meals, their conversations resuming at a lower volume, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a woman with a baby being assaulted. I've thought about that moment many times since. What I could have said. What I should have done. But in that moment all I could feel was shame. Hot, burning shame that paralyzed me where I stood. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from my hair. Emma's cries had reached a fever pitch, her small body rigid with distress. I turned toward the door, my vision blurred, my cheek throbbing, my heart shattered into pieces. That's when I heard it. A voice. Quiet, accented, and colder than the rain outside. Stop. The single word seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. I froze, one hand on the door handle. Behind me I heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. Did you not hear me? The voice came again, and this time I recognized the accent. German. Precise. Controlled. I said stop. I turned slowly. In the corner of the restaurant, partially hidden by shadows despite the warm lighting, sat a man I hadn't noticed before. He was rising from his table with the deliberate movement of someone who never needed to rush because people waited for him. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face all sharp angles and cold eyes that reflected no warmth despite the pleasant setting. But it wasn't his appearance that made everyone in that restaurant freeze. It was something else. Something intangible. An aura of absolute authority and barely contained danger that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. Victoria's face had gone pale. "Mr. Dietrich," she stammered. "I was just handling a situation." "You were handling nothing." He moved forward, and the crowd seemed to part for him without anyone consciously deciding to move. He walked with the confidence of a man who owned every room he entered, and perhaps he did. When he reached us, he didn't look at Victoria. His attention was fixed entirely on me and Emma. His eyes, ice blue and penetrating, studied my face. The red mark from Victoria's slap. My wet clothes. Emma's flushed, tear-stained face. Something flickered in his expression. Not pity. Something harder. Something that made the air feel dangerous. "What is your name?" he asked me, his voice gentler than before but no less commanding. "Clara," I whispered. "And this is Emma." He nodded once, then finally turned his attention to Victoria. The hostess looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "You struck this woman," he said. "Not a question. A statement. She was trespassing, Mr. Dietrich. I was protecting the restaurant's reputation. We have standards." "Standards." He repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "Your standard is to assault a mother holding an infant?" "I didn't assault," Victoria began, but the look he gave her cut off her protest mid-sentence. "I watched," he said quietly. "I watched you humiliate her. I watched you deny her the most basic human decency. I watched you strike her. And I watched every person in this restaurant pretend not to see." He turned, addressing the entire dining room now. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried to every corner of the space. "For those who do not know me, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Klaus Dietrich. I own this building. I own the 3 buildings on either side of it. I own most of this district, in fact." He paused, letting that information settle. "But I do not own human decency. That apparently costs more than money can buy." You could have heard a pin drop. "This woman," he continued, gesturing to me without taking his eyes off the crowd, "came into this establishment asking for nothing more than basic shelter for her child. She didn't demand food. She didn't cause a scene. She simply asked for warmth. And your hostess responded with violence." Klaus turned back to Victoria, and I saw her physically flinch. "You are terminated, effective immediately," he said. "You will leave this building within the next 2 minutes, or I will have you removed. And before you consider seeking employment elsewhere in this city, understand that I will personally ensure every establishment knows exactly why you were dismissed." Victoria's face cycled through shock, anger, and fear in rapid succession. "You can't. This is because of some homeless." The change in Klaus's expression was subtle but terrifying. 2 minutes, he repeated, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Starting now. Victoria fled. There's no other word for it. She grabbed her purse from behind the hostess stand and practically ran out the door into the rain, not even stopping to grab a coat. Klaus then turned to the restaurant manager, a nervous-looking man who'd been standing frozen near the bar. Clear the private dining room. Now. Yes, Mr. Dietrich. Right away. The manager scurried off. Only then did Klaus look at me again. The hardness in his expression softened slightly, though he still didn't smile. Come with me, please, he said. It was phrased as a request, but something told me this man wasn't accustomed to being refused. I followed him through the restaurant, acutely aware of every eye on us. Emma had quieted slightly, sensing perhaps that something had changed. Klaus led me to a door at the back of the dining room, into a beautifully appointed private space with a single table, soft lighting and blessed warmth. Sit, he instructed, pulling out a chair for me. I sank into it gratefully, my legs suddenly weak now that the adrenaline was fading. Klaus stepped back to the door and spoke to someone outside. Within minutes, several staff members appeared. One brought a high chair for Emma. Another brought a soft blanket. A third arrived with a bottle of warmed milk. For the baby, Klaus explained, gesturing to the bottle. Fresh, prepared in our kitchen. Unless you prefer formula. I shook my head, overwhelmed. This is fine. This is more than fine. I don't understand. You don't need to understand, he interrupted gently. You need to feed your daughter. I took the bottle with trembling hands and began feeding Emma. She latched onto it desperately, her small hands gripping my fingers as she drank. Watching her relax, seeing color return to her little cheeks, made tears spring to my eyes again. But these weren't tears of shame or fear. These were tears of pure relief. Klaus had taken a seat across from me, his posture relaxed but his attention focused. He didn't speak, giving me time to tend to Emma. When she'd finished the bottle and I'd burped her, he finally broke the silence. How long have you been on the streets? I considered lying, but something about this man made dishonesty feel impossible. 3 weeks. I lost my job, then my apartment. I've been trying to find work, but nobody wants to hire someone with a baby and no address. The shelters are always full by the time I get there. He nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Family. Gone. My parents died when I was young. Emma's father. I trailed off, not wanting to go into that particular darkness. I see. Klaus steepled his fingers, thinking. What did you do? Before you lost your job? I was an administrative assistant at a law firm. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. I was good at it. I felt defensive suddenly, needing him to know I wasn't always like this. Wasn't always desperate and dirty and helpless. I believe you were. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then set it aside. Here's what will happen. You will stay here and eat dinner. Real food, not scraps. You will take your time. The staff will prepare a room upstairs. I maintain an apartment above this building. You and Emma will sleep there tonight in warmth and safety. I started to protest, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune, but he held up a hand. Tomorrow, he continued, you will meet with my personal assistant. She will help you find appropriate housing. Temporary at first until you secure employment. As it happens, I own several businesses that are currently hiring for administrative positions. You will interview. If you are as competent as you claim, you will be hired based on merit, not charity. Do you understand? I could barely speak. Why are you doing this? For the first time, something resembling emotion crossed Klaus Dietrich's face. Not quite warmth, but not the cold calculation either. Something older. Something that carried weight. Because I have seen what happens when good people do nothing, he said quietly. I have watched silence enable cruelty more times than I can count. And I have reached a point in my life where I will no longer be a bystander to unnecessary suffering. He stood, straightening his jacket. Also because I once knew a woman who looked very much like you. She too held a child and asked the world for mercy. The world gave her none. I was too young then to help her. I am not too young now. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That woman who struck you, Victoria. She will not work in this city again. I want you to understand that this is not revenge on your behalf. This is consequence. There is a difference. Before I could respond, he was gone. The meal that followed was the best I'd eaten in months. The staff treated me with gentle respect, never making me feel like the charity case I clearly was. They brought dishes I couldn't pronounce, each more delicious than the last. They warmed more milk for Emma and provided a clean outfit for her when I mentioned I needed to change her diaper. But beyond the food and the comfort, what struck me most was this. Not a single person in that restaurant, save for Klaus Dietrich, had been willing to help me. They'd watched a woman with a baby get slapped and they'd done nothing. They'd returned to their expensive meals and pretended I didn't exist. Yet one man, a man who by all accounts should have been as indifferent as the rest, had instead chosen action. Not performative kindness. Not temporary charity. But real, concrete intervention that would change the trajectory of my life and Emma's. As I sat there in that warm room, my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms for the first time in weeks, I thought about what Klaus had said. About silence enabling cruelty. About good people doing nothing. The apartment upstairs turned out to be more beautiful than I'd imagined possible. Hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a bedroom with the softest bed I'd ever felt. The bathroom had a deep tub and towels so plush they felt like clouds. There were clothes laid out in my size. Simple, practical things. Jeans. Sweaters. Undergarments still in their packaging. A crib had been assembled in the bedroom, complete with fresh sheets and a mobile that played gentle music. I bathed Emma first, washing away weeks of grime and stress. She giggled at the warm water, splashing with her tiny hands, and the sound of her laughter brought fresh tears to my eyes. This was what babies should be. Happy, clean, safe. After I'd dressed her in the soft pajamas that had been provided and put her down in the crib, I ran myself a bath. As I sank into the hot water, I finally allowed myself to process everything that had happened. The humiliation. The violence. The rescue. The kindness. I touched my cheek where Victoria had struck me. The pain had faded, but I knew there would be a bruise tomorrow. A visible reminder of how quickly fortune can change for better or worse. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd been too exhausted to cover the night before. Emma was still sleeping, her little chest rising and falling peacefully. For a moment I just lay there, afraid to move, afraid this was all a dream that would shatter with consciousness. But it was real. The soft sheets. The warm room. The sounds of the city below, muffled by quality windows. All real. A knock at the door came at exactly 9 o'clock. I opened it to find a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and an efficient demeanor. Good morning, Clara. I'm Margarethe, Mr. Dietrich's personal assistant. He asked me to help you get situated today. She had a slight German accent, softer than Klaus's but still noticeable. May I come in? Over coffee that Margarethe had brought with her, we discussed practical matters. Housing options. Interview schedules. Childcare arrangements. Margarethe approached everything with brisk efficiency but never coldness. She made me feel like I was a project worth investing time in, not a burden to be managed. Mr. Dietrich has arranged for you to interview at 3 companies this week, she explained, pulling up a tablet. All administrative positions. All offering competitive salaries with benefits. He has not told them about your current situation. He insisted that you be evaluated purely on your qualifications. Why? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. Why is he doing all this? What does he want from me? Margarethe's expression softened. Mr. Dietrich is a complicated man. He operates in, let's say, complicated spaces. But he has a code. When he sees something wrong, he corrects it. When he sees someone in need who has been wronged, he helps them. He expects nothing in return except that you make the most of this opportunity. What kind of complicated spaces? Margarethe met my eyes directly. The kind we don't discuss. What you need to know is this. Klaus Dietrich is a powerful man who has chosen to use that power to help you. Accept the help. Move forward. Build a life for yourself and your daughter. That is what he wants. Nothing more. The interviews went better than I'd hoped. Despite my weeks on the street, despite having a baby, despite everything, I was still good at what I did. I knew software. I understood office management. I could communicate professionally. And knowing that Klaus Dietrich's recommendation carried weight, even unspoken, certainly didn't hurt my chances. By the end of the week I had 2 job offers. I chose the position at a mid-sized architectural firm. Good salary, excellent benefits. And they were willing to work with me on flexible hours until I found stable childcare. Margarethi helped me find an apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. A one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools nearby for when Emma was older. The rent was reasonable and there was a park across the street. The day I moved in, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a note in precise handwriting. Congratulations on your new beginning. The first 3 months' rent has been paid to give you time to establish yourself. This is not charity, it is investment. Invest wisely in yourself and your daughter. Kitty. I never saw Klaus Dietrich again after that night in the restaurant. I looked for him, hoping to thank him properly, but Margarethi gently discouraged my attempts at contact. Mr. Dietrich prefers not to form ongoing relationships with those he assists, she explained. He believes it creates uncomfortable power dynamics. He helped you. Now you move forward. That is how he prefers it. But I couldn't let it go completely. I needed to understand more about the man who'd changed my life with a few words and a phone call. So I did what anyone would do in the modern age. I researched. What I found was both fascinating and terrifying. Klaus Dietrich was not just a wealthy businessman. He was the head of one of the most powerful German crime families operating in the United States. His legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, import-export companies, were fronts for less legal enterprises. He'd been investigated multiple times but never charged. Witnesses disappeared or recanted. Evidence vanished. He operated in shadows and gray areas, a man who existed in the spaces between legal and illegal, moral and immoral. Yet the more I dug, the more complex the picture became. For every accusation of criminal activity, there were stories of unexpected charity. A hospital wing built in a poor neighborhood. Scholarships for immigrant children. Small businesses saved from bankruptcy through mysterious anonymous investors. And always a strict code. No drugs, no human trafficking, no harming civilians who weren't involved in the game. Klaus Dietrich, I learned, saw himself as operating outside conventional morality. He didn't believe in the law because he'd seen the law fail too many times. But he did believe in his own sense of justice. And on that night in the restaurant, his justice had included me. 2 years passed. Emma grew from an infant into a toddler, bright and curious and happy. My job turned into a career. I moved from that first small apartment into a better one. I dated occasionally but focused primarily on being the best mother I could be. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Stable. Safe. I never forgot that night, though. How could I? The worst moment of my life had immediately preceded the best. The cruelty of one stranger had been answered by the intervention of another. Then, on a cold autumn evening very similar to the one 2 years before, I was walking home from the grocery store with Emma when I saw something that made me stop. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, was sitting on the steps of a closed store. She was crying, her shoulders shaking, and in her arms was a tiny baby that couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. They were both soaked from rain, and I could see from the plastic bags next to them that everything they owned could fit in 2 shopping bags. The pedestrians flowed around them like water around a rock. No one stopped. No one helped. Everyone pretended not to see. And I thought about Victoria's slap. About Klaus's intervention. About Margarethi's words. When he sees something wrong, he corrects it. I thought about the person I was before that night and the person I'd become after. Not just financially stable but fundamentally changed in how I saw the world and my responsibility to others in it. Emma tugged on my hand. Mama? Why is that lady crying? She's having a hard time, sweetie, I said quietly. Can we help her? Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. I walked over to the young woman and crouched down beside her. She flinched, probably expecting to be told to move along, to stop being an eyesore, to disappear. Hi, I said gently. My name is Clara. What's yours? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, suspicious and desperate at the same time. Sarah. Sarah, when's the last time you and your baby had a warm meal and a safe place to sleep? Her face crumpled. 3 days. I held out my hand. Come with me. I know a place. I took Sarah to Giovanni's. The same restaurant. It had changed ownership since that night. Klaus no longer had direct involvement, though I suspected he still owned the building. But the current manager remembered my story. Everyone who worked there remembered the night Klaus Dietrich had fired a hostess for striking a homeless woman. When I explained who Sarah was and what she needed, the manager didn't hesitate. A table was cleared. Food was brought. Warmth was provided. And by the end of the evening I'd made some calls. Margarethi, who I'd kept in occasional contact with, connected me with a network of resources I hadn't known existed. Housing advocates, job placement services, childcare assistance programs. Within a week, Sarah had a path forward. Not an easy path, but a possible one. As I helped Sarah navigate those first difficult steps, I realized something profound. Klaus Dietrich hadn't just helped me that night. He'd shown me what it looked like to refuse to be a bystander. He'd demonstrated that one person, using whatever power they possessed, could interrupt the cycle of cruelty and indifference. I wasn't a wealthy mafia boss. I didn't own buildings or control criminal enterprises. But I had resources. I had knowledge. I had a voice. And I could use those things to help someone else the way I'd been helped. That realization became action. I started volunteering at homeless shelters. I connected with other mothers who'd experienced homelessness and formed a support group. We helped each other, shared resources, advocated for policy changes. What started as my attempt to pay forward one man's kindness became a movement of sorts. Small, grassroots, but real. Emma grew up knowing that we helped people. She learned that when you see someone in need, you don't look away. You act. You do what you can with what you have. One day, about 3 years after that night, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single card, expensive paper, with a brief message in that familiar, precise handwriting. I hear you are paying it forward. This is good. This is the only thanks I ever wanted. Keep building. Pity. Enclosed was a check for $10,000 made out to the homeless assistance organization I'd helped found. I never tried to contact him or thank him. I understood now. This was how Klaus Dietrich operated. From the shadows. With resources and power used carefully, strategically. He didn't want gratitude or recognition. He wanted results. He wanted the world to be slightly less cruel, one intervention at a time. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have grasped in that moment when Victoria struck me. That moment wasn't just about me. It was about every person who'd been in a similar position and been ignored. Every person who'd asked for basic human decency and been denied. Every person who'd needed help and found the world looking away. And Klaus Dietrich, for all his moral complexity and questionable methods, had refused to look away. He'd seen injustice and corrected it immediately, without hesitation, without needing to be asked. That night in Giovanni's, I learned that power itself is neither good nor evil. It's how we choose to use it that matters. Victoria had the power to let me sit quietly in a corner for 20 minutes, but she chose cruelty. Klaus had the power to do nothing, to finish his meal and leave, but he chose intervention. Every day we all have power. The power to notice or ignore. The power to help or harm. The power to speak or stay silent. The power to reach out or walk past. What happened to me could happen to anyone. One missed paycheck. One medical emergency. One relationship that falls apart. That's all it takes to go from stable to desperate. And when you're desperate, you learn very quickly who will help and who will hurt. I wish I could say that Victoria's slap was the worst I experienced during those 3 weeks on the street. But it wasn't. There were worse things. People who saw me as invisible. People who treated Emma like she was somehow less than human because her mother was homeless. People who would rather throw away good food than give it to someone hungry. But I also encountered small kindnesses that I'll never forget. The store clerk who let me use the bathroom even though I wasn't a customer. The stranger who bought Emma diapers and handed them to me without a word. The old woman who gave me her umbrella on a rainy night and walked away before I could thank her. Klaus Dietrich's intervention was exceptional in its scope and power, but it was part of a spectrum of human behavior that ranges from casual cruelty to extraordinary kindness. And we all choose every day where on that spectrum we want to operate. The restaurant incident became somewhat legendary in certain circles of the city. People told the story, sometimes accurately, sometimes embellished. The homeless woman who got slapped and was rescued by a mafia boss. It took on mythic qualities as stories do.
Not shaking this time. Clear. Steady. I've known for a long time that something about me didn't fit the life I was living. I just kept telling myself it was easier to ignore it than deal with the consequences. He looked straight ahead, not at me. I dated women. I built an image. I played the part everyone expected. And it worked, at least on the outside. His voice dropped. But every time someone got close, I pulled back. Every time I felt something real, I shut it down. He finally turned to me then. And then there was you. The words landed heavily between us. I didn't plan this, he said. I didn't want this. But I couldn't stop it either. I could hear the conflict in his voice. Not doubt about his feelings, but fear of what they meant. When we held hands, he said quietly, something in me stopped fighting. He laughed softly, almost broken. And that scared me more than anything ever has. I stayed silent, letting him finish. I went home that night and realized I wasn't confused about you, he said. I was confused about who I'd been pretending to be. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. I'm in love with you, he said. No build-up, no apology, just truth. The room felt impossibly still. I don't know what comes next, he added quickly. I don't know how to do this the right way. I don't even know how to explain this to the people in my life. His voice cracked. But I know I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you isn't real. I felt tears sting my own eyes. Ryan, I said softly. I never needed you to have everything figured out. He shook his head. That's the thing. I needed you to know that I wasn't just experimenting. I wasn't using you to figure myself out. He reached for my hand, but stopped himself halfway, hovering. This is real to me, he said. You are real to me. I closed the distance and took his hand myself. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. I was terrified you'd walk away, he admitted. That you'd see me as someone who waited too long. Someone who didn't choose you fast enough. I squeezed his hand. I stayed, I said, because I saw how hard this was for you. He nodded, eyes glassy. I don't expect you to wait forever, he said. And I don't want to hurt you. I met his gaze. Then don't lie, I said. That's all I need. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan leaned forward slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. His forehead rested against mine. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just closeness. I've spent my whole life thinking love had to be loud or certain, he whispered. But this feels quiet and terrifying and honest. He pulled back just enough to look at me. If you're willing, he said. I want to try. Not perfectly. Not publicly yet. But honestly. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. I'm not asking for easy, I said. I'm asking for real. He nodded. That's all I can offer. Then finally he kissed me. Not rushed. Not desperate. Careful. Like something precious. When we pulled back, his hands were shaking. He laughed softly. I guess there's no going back now. I smiled through my tears. No, I said. There isn't. But even in that moment, as powerful and freeing as it felt, I knew something else was true. Confession is only the beginning. And the world outside that room was still waiting. The days after Ryan's confession didn't feel dramatic. There were no grand gestures. No sudden clarity. No instant sense that everything had been solved. Instead, there was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has finally been set down. We didn't rush into anything. We didn't pretend that one confession erased years of fear or habit. What changed was simpler and harder. We stopped lying. Ryan checked in more. Not constantly. Just enough to let me know he was choosing presence over avoidance. Sometimes he'd text something ordinary. Did you eat? Work was rough today. Thinking about you. Small things. But they mattered. There were moments when doubt crept back in. Moments when I could see him hesitate before saying something honest. Moments when I wondered if the weight of choosing himself would eventually become too much. We talked about those moments instead of pretending they didn't exist. That was new for both of us. One night, a few weeks later, we sat on the same couch again. Same room. Different energy. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, I never realized how much effort it took to hide until I stopped doing it. I didn't respond right away, because I knew exactly what he meant. There were still boundaries. Still things he wasn't ready to face publicly. Still people in his life who didn't know the truth. And I won't pretend that didn't hurt sometimes. But what made the difference was this: he didn't shut down when it came up. I don't want to lose you, he said once, quietly. And I don't want to lose myself again either. That sentence stayed with me, because it told me this wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about intention. We moved slowly, not because we were unsure, but because we respected how fragile honesty can be when it's new. Some nights we talked for hours, about his past, about my fears, about what it means to build something without a script to follow. Other nights we just sat together in silence, comfortable, connected. And yes, there were moments when reality pressed in hard. A look held too long in public. A hand that didn't reach out when it wanted to. A conversation cut short because the timing wasn't safe. Those moments reminded us that the world doesn't always make room for quiet truths. But they also reminded us why honesty mattered so much in the first place. One evening, Ryan looked at me and said, "I used to think being honest meant losing control." He paused, then added, "But hiding was what was actually controlling me." That's when I realized how far he'd come, and how far I had too. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping he'd become someone else on some imaginary timeline. I was choosing what was in front of me. A man learning how to live honestly, even when it scared him. Not every story ends with certainty. Some end with clarity instead. This one ended with two people choosing to keep showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. Even when the answers weren't complete. And maybe that's the real resolution. Not a perfect future. Not a dramatic promise. Just the decision to stop running from the truth once it finally has a name. So I want to ask you something. If someone trusted you with the part of themselves they'd spent years hiding, not because it was easy, but because it was finally too heavy to carry alone, would you be patient with their fear? Would you stand with them while they learned how to be honest? Or would you walk away, wishing they'd been braver sooner? There's no right answer, but every choice leaves a mark. And sometimes the bravest thing two people can do is choose honesty one quiet moment at a time.
But the truth as I lived it was both simpler and more complex than the myth. Yes, I was saved by a powerful man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I was also saved by my own resilience, by the network of support that formed around me, by every choice I made afterward to build a better life. Klaus gave me an opportunity. I took it and ran with it. That's the part people sometimes forget in the dramatic retelling. The intervention matters, but what you do with it matters more. Emma is 5 now. She starts kindergarten next week. She knows the basics of our story, how we went through a hard time, how someone helped us, how we help others now. When she's older, I'll tell her more. I'll tell her about the slap and the fear and the cold. I'll tell her about Klaus Dietrich and what it means to use power responsibly. But most importantly, I'll teach her what I learned that night. That bystanders enable cruelty through their silence, and that even the smallest act of intervention can change everything. Recently I drove past Giovanni's. It's still there, still successful, still serving expensive Italian food to well-dressed customers. I thought about going in, maybe sitting at that same table where Klaus had offered me dinner and dignity in equal measure. But I didn't. Some moments belong to their own time. Going back would be trying to relive something that was never meant to be relived. It was meant to be learned from. To be honored through action, not nostalgia. Instead, I drove to the shelter where I volunteer twice a week. There was a young mother there, new to the streets, terrified for her child. I sat down next to her, offered her a warm drink and said the same words Klaus had said to me. "You don't need to understand. You just need to let me help." Her relief, her tears, her gratitude, they reminded me that the cycle continues. Cruelty begets cruelty unless someone intervenes. Kindness begets kindness when given the chance to flourish. Klaus Dietrich taught me that intervention requires courage, especially when everyone else is choosing silence. It requires a willingness to disrupt the comfortable fiction that someone else will help, that it's not your problem, that getting involved is more trouble than it's worth. But intervention also requires power, and here's what I've learned. Power comes in many forms. Yes, Klaus had money and influence and the ability to change my circumstances with a phone call. But I have power too. The power to notice. The power to speak. The power to share resources, make connections, advocate for change. We all have more power than we think. The question is whether we'll use it or whether we'll join the crowd of silent diners, carefully not seeing the suffering at the door. This story could have ended so differently. Victoria could have let me sit down. I could have found warmth elsewhere. Klaus could have stayed in his corner, finished his meal and gone about his evening. But none of those things happened. Instead, cruelty was answered with justice, and justice created opportunity, and opportunity became transformation. When people ask me what I learned from being homeless, from being struck in public, from being rescued by a mafia boss, I tell them this. I learned that the world is exactly as cruel or as kind as we collectively decide to make it. Every interaction is a choice. Every moment of need is a test. Most people fail that test. They walk past. They look away. They convince themselves it's not their problem, not their responsibility. And in doing so, they contribute to a world where a mother can be slapped for asking to sit down while holding her baby. But some people pass the test. They stop. They intervene. They refuse to let cruelty go unanswered. And those people, whether they're powerful like Klaus or ordinary like the clerk who let me use the bathroom, they're the ones who make the world bearable. I don't know where Klaus Dietrich is now or what he's doing. I don't know if he remembers me or thinks about that night at all. But I remember. I remember every detail. And I've built my life around honoring what he taught me through his actions. That's the real ending to this story if there is one. Not the dramatic rescue in the restaurant, though that makes for good telling. The real ending is years of small choices. Years of seeing need and responding. Years of teaching Emma that we help because we were helped, that we intervene because someone intervened for us. The real ending is understanding that we're all one bad month, one unfortunate circumstance, one cruel person away from being on either side of that slap. And when we recognize that fundamental vulnerability, that shared humanity, it becomes impossible to walk past suffering without acting. So yes, a ruthless German mafia boss saved me and my daughter from freezing on the streets. But more than that, he showed me what it looks like to refuse complicity with cruelty. And that lesson, that gift, has shaped every day of my life since. The restaurant may have been full of diners that night, but only one person saw me. Really saw me. And in seeing, he chose to act. That choice rippled outward in ways he'll never fully know, creating waves of intervention and kindness that continue to spread. This is my testimony to the power of refusing to be a bystander. To the importance of intervention. To the truth that cruelty thrives in silence but withers under the light of action. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. When you see someone in need, when you witness injustice, when you watch cruelty unfold, do something. Say something. Be the person who stops the cycle instead of perpetuating it. Because you never know when you might be the Klaus Dietrich in someone's story. The person who shows up at exactly the right moment with exactly the right kind of power to change everything. And you never know when you might need someone to be that person for you.